So that's basically me. I'm a big gushy care bear. I absolutely love everybody and mean people. I just don't, I don't interact, I don't, there's no, I have no desire to do that dance, So I show up with a lot of empathy, a lot of understanding, a lot of love, and just a lot of support with my friends, my colleagues. I do not believe in hierarchical systems. I really do believe that we are all equal, all of us. It doesn't matter what your position is, what your job is, what your diagnosis is. I just see humans as the most amazing beings that have like so much potential, and we all just need to feel more connected and loved, seen, and validated. So that is my commitment. I'll get into more formal stuff in a sec, but yeah, drop your name, what you're looking to, get out of today's workshop and or masterclass, and anything else y'all want to share. Ariel, hi. Yeah, 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 yeah. I'm gonna make a little intro. They didn't know I was going to do this, so don't kill me. But two introductions. One is my office manager, Gigi. She is absolutely incredible. She's here on the call. She'll be answering any questions that you guys might have in terms of if you want a link to the website or a program or a workshop that I've done in the past, a link to book a consultation with me, a discovery call. Just drop it in the chat box, and Gigi is going to keep an eye on things. A little personal side note about Gigi, she single-handedly equipped me with the strength and resources to get my explants when I was sick with breast implant illness. So that's one of my areas that I focus on in my practice, is helping women identify how they got sick with breast implant illness and how to get out of it. So Gigi played an integral role in that for me, and I'm eternally grateful. And she was my very first bar partner when I was 19 years old. We used to bartend in Toronto together. I'll stop sharing your information now, Gigi. But yeah, we love Gigi. And I'm also going to introduce one of my dear, dear friends and business coaches, Jess Rodriguez. She's here. She's already been kind of introducing herself. Her and her fiance, Marcos, have played integral roles in me shifting out of my trauma responses in business and getting into action in a really trauma-informed way. And it was shocking because when they came into my life, I saw, these high producers, high functioning, really professional people. And I wasn't sure how trauma-informed they were going to be. I was really testing the waters. We lived together for a month in Costa Rica when I first moved here. And I started to learn how emotionally available they are and how willing they are to play ball and go in the dark places and hold space for deep emotion and ask for permission before giving any unsolicited coaching. So that's another example of how being trauma informed and willing to be emotionally available with your clients can transform them. I would have never achieved this level of success in my business if it wasn't for trauma-informed coaches like Jess and Marcos. So I just want to give a big shout out to them. Love you, Jessie Moo. And everybody else that's here. I just want to thank you for showing up, because I'm sure not only do you want to work through your own trauma and how that might be showing up in your business, but also what is just so endearing to me is people's desire to show up in a safer way for their colleagues, their clients, their communities. And I just think that's what's going to heal this world. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Awesome. I'm just reading the comments here. Beautiful. Okay. So I'm going to ask everybody just to mute their mics, because I am recording this. Yeah, beautiful. Jessie, you breathing? I just muted you. All right, so I'm going to share my screen here. All right. So welcome to our 2-hour masterclass on how to be more trauma informed in your practice. And yeah, this came to me just kind of, it just hit me like a ton of bricks because I work so much one-on-one and in group containers with my clientele as to how they can effectively work through their own trauma. But I've never taught practitioners how to do this. And why not? Why not? You know, there's a major opportunity in the industry right now to become trauma informed, because I think the idea in the past was trauma informed practitioners would be like psychiatrists, psychotherapists, ambulance, like paramedics, anybody that's dealing with like the traditional big T traumas, right? Like physical impacts, car accidents, near-death experiences, medical trauma, et cetera. But what we're learning is trauma goes far beyond those traditional definitions. And it's much more complex and nuanced. And the problem that I see where we're bottlenecking as practitioners is that we learn our specific niche, like how to show up for our specific niche. So if you're a massage therapist and you go to school to become an RMT, you're learning all of the techniques, you know, to become an RMT. It's not that you're necessarily going to learn how to show up for people in a trauma-informed way by recognizing a trauma response when it's in front of you, B, recognizing your own trauma response to their trauma response, and C, having effective teaching, you know, strategies, or even just like human interaction based strategies that you can use to not induce more trauma. Part of being trauma informed is to make sure that you're not contributing to further traumatizing the client. And that can be a really deep and dynamic and vast area to learn. So it's less about, hey, let's just do what I do in an hour and charge for that hour and be on with my day so I can buy my groceries and pay my rent and save for my retirement. If you're thinking outside of those more patriarchal ways of looking at business and you want to approach in more matriarchal ways, this is where we can start to invest our time, our resources, into really taking the time to learn how trauma shows up in us and in our communities so that we can customize our business to really support them. If I can ask everybody to just put their mic on mute. Thank you. So without further ado, my name is Cassandra Hope. I am Erin. What's up? Oh, I'm so glad you're here, Mama. This is so great. So yeah, my name is Cassandra Hope. I am a functional trauma therapist. It's just a nice little container to help people know that I'm working with the whole picture. It's not just talk therapy. I'm looking at the structural side of things. I'm looking at the biochemistry. I'm looking at life experiences and how that in turn has affected how the brain operates. And then I'm also a facilitator. So I teach people the theory and practices of how to take these very complex theories and really put them into a lifestyle practice that is strategized, evidence-based, and really designed to help people self-heal. I am not healing anybody. I am not a healer. I don't identify with that title. It's fine if you do, of course. But I am, you know, really invested in helping people figure out how to do this on their own long term. And I think that that's something that we would have done, you know, for hundreds of thousands of years. We as communities lived in more commune-based environments where we shared, and we had like traditional healing circles where we would, you know, share our experiences. And we innately know how to hear somebody's story or hear somebody's offerings and translate that into worthiness for us at the right, like to make it worthwhile for us in terms of gaining more of our window, like being in more of our window of tolerance more often, where we can have safe and fulfilling relationships, safe and fulfilling work environments, safe relationships with money, with our bodies, with our self-care practice, right? This is something that we've been robbed of, in my opinion, since things became incredibly patriarchal. And we're just ushered off to school, ushered off to work. We don't really have people who are super invested in our growth on a big scale. Not everybody, but most people feel, I would say a lot of our dysfunction in society right now is rooted in us not having the generations of people who are in our immediate space that take the time to see us, sit with us, help us process pain and emotion, teach us about ourselves, or hold space for us to learn about ourselves. So I think Instagram is, as much as I hate Instagram, I also love it because there's all these coaches and people who are wanting to show up with free information and co-regulate with their communities. And I feel like we are figuring out a way to push through the patriarchy and reconnect, right? And that's what we're doing through these workshops and teaching. It's my highest honor. It's my highest honor. So yeah, that is what I do and why I'm here. And unfortunately, I have a lot of personal experience with this. The trauma runs deep in my family. It's so deep that the only person that I have left that's of blood relation to me is my father. And we have a very estranged relationship, but he's lovely. He is lovely. And part of my trauma recovery has been to recognize that my chronic physical symptoms and autoimmune disease and brain injuries and all of the things that have happened to me over the years were a result of this trauma, and really acknowledging it in a world where people don't validate things that they don't know about. Trauma victims really need to learn about their trauma and how it's impacted their bodies and their lives so that they can advocate for themselves. Because we are going to get a lot of people who don't validate us in our experience, not because they're evil, maybe they are, I don't know, but because they don't know how. We can only acknowledge what we understand unless we have a trained mind to more hold space and be curious and witness somebody's experience and just hold space, right? We don't have to fully understand as coaches, but it's really helpful when we don't understand to simply be curious. So I've really practiced curiosity with my own body and my own symptoms and learned to reparent myself in my mindset, in how I speak to myself, how I show up in relationships, how I implement boundaries. And that is the practice of reparenting ourselves after trauma. Okay. So Be Well with Hope offers functional protocols. They can be very complex and overwhelming and alienating for clients. So my trauma-informed practitioner training that's launching November 17th, it's a 12-week course with an option to add on 6 months of clinical mentorship to teach you, if you're in a position as a functional practitioner and you want to be able to show up in a trauma-informed and functional way from point A to point Z, that is what we go through in depth. Okay. I have an amazing team of women who are functional practitioners, and they are either already have been trained or currently in training to become fully Be Well with Hope certified functional practitioners. And really, it's all rooted in being able to identify the trauma-based vulnerabilities in our clientele, and then to strategically support them in rerouting their responses to stress based on all of the macro points that I teach in the training, which is, it's not just about complex mental and emotional trauma. It's also about the role that infections and toxicities and implants play in traumatizing the body. We need to be able to tease apart the idea that, we identify so much with our mental presentations, whether we're anxious, intolerant, angry, resentful, if we're stuck, we think they're personality traits, and they're not. They are rooted in biochemistry. And that is the approach we take at Be Well with Hope as trauma-informed functional practitioners. And then we want to also remove the common trauma triggers. So like I mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, hierarchical energies have no place in a trauma-informed space. So that's where like our own trauma work really becomes beneficial, because we can recognize the desire to have all the answers, or to be in a position of authority, or to not feel safe explaining, and rather we just want to tell them what to do. If they don't do what we're doing, we tell them, we might tell them things like, you're procrastinating or you're self-sabotaging. I don't believe those are even a thing. They're not a thing. They are attempts that people make to stay in their window of tolerance. And it's up to us to know that and hold space for that and teach them how to come out of that as their ally, as their teammate, not as their, what's the word? Not subordinate, the opposite, like their boss. I don't know. I'm not, executive functions not fully back on board yet. Still a little shaky. But yeah, that black or white patriarchal model of coaching, like, if you've ever gone into, I love medical doctors. I'm not shitting on them. I think that there's a beautiful role for them. But we often go in there looking for a matriarchal trauma-informed energy, and we get pissed because they don't have that bedside manner. So that's a good example of more patriarchal, do as I say, limited time, exchanging time for money, very black and white style of showing up for people in their illness, where we can actually recreate it. We can totally recreate it. And that's what I've done with, as I was mentioning, Jess and Marcos, that's what I've done with Be Well with Hope, is I've recreated the coaching model so that it does offer a lot of explanation, a lot of time, a lot of accessibility. And if you do end up taking the trauma-informed practitioner training, you'll see how we do that. Or if you hire Coachable, which I highly recommend. Okay, so I've kind of already covered this. I'm not going to beat it to death. Yeah, I've covered it. I'm a functional trauma therapist. I don't just look at talk therapy. I actually don't spend time talking about the trauma itself in the coaching container. And we'll get into that some more in a bit. But reliving the trauma is an old way, like it's a very outdated model of trauma therapy, where people would say, okay, write out the event until you no longer get a visceral response from it. Whew. That can be debilitating for a trauma victim. Even therapists, and like I went to KMH, I had a nervous breakdown years ago, like 4 years ago now. Oh God, how long ago? And I admitted myself into KMH, and my psychiatrist and my drug counselor were very black and white, right? It's a medical model of trauma care. And I remember the points where I was like, oh, I just clammed right up. I remember the conversation, what they said and how they said it. So even quote unquote trauma-informed practitioners and doctors are not super trauma-informed. And that's speaking not as a judgment as a facilitator. I'm speaking as a patient, as a trauma victim, saying I did not feel safe, seen, and validated or resourced after that session. It actually made me feel less in touch with my agency, with my ability to get into action, right? So something to consider when you're hiring people, if you're hiring people, to really learn what trauma-informed means and interview them. They're not just interviewing us, interview them, right? The chat box is going. I'm just going to take a look. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. 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 Awesome. Okay. We're going to go through the chat. I'll stop that. We'll go through the chat box later. I just love seeing what you guys are saying. Okay. So this is going to be our masterclass flow. First, we're going to cover what trauma is. And that's a really, really, really important piece because it's so vast, right? And it's not about memorizing all of the definitions or all of the things that are mentioned here. It's really about understanding the energy of trauma, right? So we're going to get into that. And then we're going to talk about our role as practitioners, teachers, coaches in a trauma-informed way, the opportunities that we have as that beautiful counterpart for our clients. How can we show up in a way that they don't even know we're helping them heal, but it's really helping them heal? Okay. And then the third area that we're going to dip into is the coaching container. So this is more the functional approaches when we're in the shit with the client, when we're there, ground zero, we're moving through it with them. How do we do that in a more trauma-informed way? Okay. And I'll preface all of this with many of you here are already trauma-informed, already in your trauma-informed practice. You might have degrees and PhDs and all of it. So this is going to possibly be review, but also there's going to be some new stuff to learn. So, one thing I teach a lot about is limbic system impairment. And some of the signs of limbic system impairment, which are signs of trauma, is so unbelievably awakening. Like I'm like, wow. So one of them is feeling like an expert or knowing everything, like knowing more than this course. So recognizing that in yourself, but then also recognizing that in a potential client, right? And seeing how we're not actually trying to be difficult. It's a trauma response, and we'll get into why. It's really, really cool. The more I learn about humanity and how we show up in social interactions, the more I realize that we actually are a series of binary code. Like we think we're so unique, and we are unique. I mean, this isn't a black or white statement, but we are pretty predictable when we understand input and the input's response based on our experiences. That'll make more sense in a bit. I'll keep going. All right, so what is trauma? So there are some pretty epic explanations as to what trauma is. If you Google it, and I am going to actually put a link to a really great study on what being trauma-informed is. It's amazing. And there's some really great definitions in there. But basically, you're really trying to identify, as a practitioner, you're trying to identify the signs and effectively learn how to coach them through it without causing further harm. Okay, so we understand it, we understand how it's impacting the client, we understand how to show up as practitioners, and we understand how to strategize with them to empower them in ways that will help them break free from the trauma loops by being more empowered and strategic in their life, right? But there's a really great definition that Mastin Kipp once, I heard him say this and I loved it. In essence, trauma is what happens in the body when an event comes on fast, feels like too much, and is happening too soon. So I invite you to take a second and think about how that might show up for a client. Okay, that can happen when you think that your dad's going to show up to your basketball game and he doesn't come. That can elicit a trauma response in a child because our autonomic nervous system, which takes up 90% of who we are, it's all subconscious. So when we hear about the subconscious, it's another term for the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is connected to different parts of the brain and our visceral organs and our enteric nervous system. And they're exchanging information all the time. And it's based on hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. So if a child, we see this in nature. Like if you saw, I see howler monkeys here all the time. So let's say a howler monkey has a baby and they leave their baby at a time when the baby really needed them. We'd be like, oh shit, girl, why are you leaving your baby? Why aren't you there? Go get your baby. Right? But this happens all the time to humans because we are living in a very patriarchal model of society where we have meetings and we have to get nannies and, not to shit on moms who are trying to do it all. It's not even about that. It's not even about that. It's really just about understanding the physiology of our autonomic system and understanding the needs that we have as human beings when it comes to social engagement, both with our caretakers, our family, our friends, our coworkers, society, everything. And when we learn how that feeling of something happening too much, too fast, too soon might impact a person, no matter their age, no matter their race, no matter their income, right? We're practicing empathy as opposed to judgment. We're really leading with curiosity about the person as opposed to saying, well, you have to fit into my understanding of what difficulty is or what challenge is. That is not practicing a trauma-informed approach to care, right? And that goes with our clients and everybody, our colleagues, our lovers, our everything, our friends. So how might somebody experience something coming on too fast, too much, and too soon? Well, COVID's another example. March 13th, all of a sudden I was told, you're not going back to work. I had a thriving coaching practice 5 days a week as a functional personal trainer and nutritionist. I was busy. I was making 80 grand a year. I was paying my bills. I was thinking about next steps, definitely wanting to shift gears and get out of there. So that became a blessing. But fuck, I couldn't get off my couch for the first month or two. It came on too much, too fast, and too soon. I was traumatized, right? So how do we resource ourselves? How do we resource our clients to tease that apart, to learn why it was too much, too fast, too soon? To learn how to slow things down for themselves, right? To push the brake pedal. What does that look like with our language, with our responses versus reactions? By being in our body and experiencing the physiology of trauma, something that a lot of trauma victims don't have the luxury of doing because they dissociate, right? We're going to get into all of this, guys. Don't worry. If you're not grasping it, it's because this is kind of like an overview, but it's going to make more sense in a bit. So when we learn to actually somatically experience what's coming up for us when something is stressful, that's the beginning. That's the first, it's like the first connection to, you're still in there. You're in there. Okay. I'm connected to you. I see you. Oh, fuck. I feel how this is landing for you. I feel it. I'm there with you. Right? Can you see how it's reparenting in a sense? How we're trying on a different way of showing up for ourselves in a way that we wish we had somebody do for us when we were growing up or we were experiencing the trauma. Hey, I'm going to slow things down. I'm going to ask for space. I'm going to tell somebody they don't have the right to speak to me or contact me or come at like boundaries, right? So a lot of trauma victims never learned about boundaries because they were raised in homes with a lot of intergenerational trauma. And we model our environment when we grow up. So as practitioners, a lot of this has to do with teaching our clients to recognize the signs of trauma within their bodies, develop a safe connection with their bodies, because oftentimes our body is not a safe place to be when we're experiencing trauma. So teaching them, hey, I see how difficult it might be to somatically experience this. And I'm here with you. And we're going to talk about some statistics that come with somatically experiencing and some actual experiences that I've had. And I'm going to teach you how to, buffer it so that there's bandwidth in your somatic experiencing of the overwhelm, right? This is how we show up as trauma-informed practitioners. We give them options. We look around the room with them and we say, okay, let's take a look. What does it look like? Where does it feel good? What does the language sound like? Are you getting scared? Okay, what do you need? Do you need to visualize a hug? Do you need to take a deep breath? Do we need to take pause on this conversation? It's a continuous check-in with the client's experience. Okay. So our role as trauma-informed practitioners is to screen, inform, support, and empower, not to heal them. Okay. They self-heal their trauma. We are not healing their trauma. I can't make that clear enough. If we start thinking that we're healing people's trauma, I would invite you to possibly research codependency. And that's okay. If you're showing up in a codependent way, that's okay, because it is what it is, right? But we have the opportunity to sidestep shame if that's coming up for us and look for the opportunity, right? Look for the opportunity to empower our clients to advocate for themselves. I also want to say the word screening, it's less about, so screening is a very safe process. And what's the word Coachable uses? It is a pre-qualifying process. And qualifying a client isn't about saying you're good enough or you're not good enough to work with me. It's about being able to recognize when somebody is actually able to show up in your coaching container to receive the coaching. If you're not the coach for them, the most honorable thing you can do is let them know that, right? Because we can cause a lot more damage as therapists, as coaches, trainers, anybody. When we take on a client because we want to hit our quota for the month versus taking on a client because we super know that they are a dream client and we are their dream coach. Okay, that's where the magic happens. Because if you're not pre-qualifying a client, you're scrambling to meet them with connection and to get results, right? That in itself can further traumatize the client. They might take it on themselves thinking, I'm fucking up. I'm not doing a good enough job. That could elicit trauma responses from childhood, not being enough, not being celebrated enough or valued or rewarded or, validated. Like, we really do have to think about, is this connection really healthy and good, right? And then being able to say no to situations in a trauma-informed way that will not yield the ideal outcome. Okay. So the thing about, being trauma-informed is, and a lot of you who are here today, I've exchanged DMs with and gotten to know, your questions a little bit more. And it's like, whoa, how do I even I often people become trauma-informed through their own experiences, right? Of therapy, of going through the system, of going through any trainings. And it's not always it's not black and white. There's so many different ways of showing up in a trauma-informed way. And this is a 2-hour masterclass on something that I've been researching for 20 years. So this is by no means all of it, right? These are points, jumping off points to be curious about, to explore, to start to implement. And I also invite you to join the actual practitioner training where we go in the coaching container and we tease it all apart. right? Case studies, we role play, we get into all of the data, the research, the theory, and the strategic practices. Okay, so these are my personal pillars of being trauma informed. So one is research. So first, you want to be well informed. You have to get informed when it comes to trauma and how it impacts the body, and how it shows up both in words, in tones of voice, in eye contact, in body language, in behaviors, whether they show up for sessions, whether they do their growth work or their quote unquote homework. These are all things that we need to know why they're there, why they're presenting, and how we can support them through those presentations, right? In a way that always allows them to feel safe. The first thing that the client or the victim needs to establish in order to heal from trauma is safety. And that starts in the coaching container, right? Do your own trauma work. So I still have trauma responses to shit. Definitely. Oh my God, definitely. But I've learned how to take space from it in the coaching container so that I'm not barfing my trauma on my client, right? Like we don't get into like heated debates or like, you know, we don't get into arguments or like any ego shit. We're really there just to hold space. And if we feel that we're getting like, you know, a somatic response to something, it's our job to learn how to down regulate and get into our own window of tolerance so that we're not barfing on our clients. Okay. Doing our own trauma work also allows us to see the client more so in their experience, right? That whole thing I was saying earlier, where we can only really understand what we know. A lot of us need to experientially go through the trauma work to be like, now I understand why that client was doing that. I do that. I just had my blinders on. I didn't see it, right? So you can see this is lifelong work. This isn't something that you're going to get just in 12 weeks. This is something that, you know, we're constantly committed to in our lives and our schooling and any courses we take, etc., books we read. The other piece is validation. So validating our clients and their experience. Whew, wow, it's a game changer. How often do we hear a client speak and we can't wait for the second that we can jump in and tell them what to do, right? Oftentimes, people just want to be acknowledged and heard, and that's enough to downregulate their autonomic system because they feel safe, they feel seen, they're acknowledged in their truth. And that will reduce cortisol, will reduce adrenaline, because they don't feel that they have to be on the defense. They don't feel like they have to fight or work for their worthiness in your presence, something that they might have had to do with their parents or their teachers or, you know, a coach growing up with sports or something. Like, we really, really, really do need to start to understand how complex childhood neglect and abuse impacts our ability to show up in a healthy way in adult relationships. So by acknowledging and validating them, that's something they might have never gotten in their lives. That is healing. That is medicine, right? Just through social engagement, a healthy model of social engagement. Encouraging autonomy. So really understanding how codependency shows up. Codependency, I think, needs a rebrand. They need some PR, the term codependency, because there's two sides to meeting somebody. There's the side that is rooted in evolution, where we are social beings, we're pack beings. We need people to be healthy, to balance our hormones, to feel purpose, to want to be alive, right? We have evolved for hundreds of thousands of years to be dependent on somebody who we develop a connection with, right? The issue that codependency has is when we start to get into manipulation and addiction, where we start to believe they will only be okay if I show up for them in this way. I need to abandon my needs, my boundaries, my intuition, and solely lean into what they need so that we keep the peace. And it's much more vast than that. A really great way to learn about codependency in the trenches is to sign up for Al-Anon. It's a free 12-step program. And I think somebody just joined. If you could turn your mic off, I can hear a little bit of wind or something there. And welcome, 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 welcome. Al-Anon is a really great place to go for free, meet online, and hear about people's experiences with codependency. And I'm not a huge advocate for 12-step programs. I know a lot of coaches are. I've personally gone through almost all of them, both as a member of a family who was very codependent and as an addict myself. So I think there's things that you can take from it, but I also think there's a lot more trauma that can happen in those 12-step programs. So I like that they're online now. I actually really was worried when people were going in person to like, Love Addiction Anonymous or Limerence Anonymous or drug, Cocaine Anonymous, because codependency is vibration. It's a strong energy. And we can get pulled into it really easily when we're around people who know how to, do that dance. So I say that with an asterisk next to it, Al-Anon. But then there's tons of videos, YouTube and Instagram and, free coaching teasers where, I think I also did a program on codependency on Gaia, or it was like Gaia or the Elephant Journal or something. And it was a 12-week program. I think it was like $35. And honestly, it was the best $35 I've ever spent, because it gave the theory and the practice on codependency. And it really helps you to tease it apart where you can go, oh, that's what healthy feels like. And that's what manipulation feels like. So that you can start to recognize the red flags in any relationship and create space if need be. Right. And then learning about boundaries. So a lot of people who have experienced trauma, not all of them, but a lot of people don't know boundaries because they've just never seen them. They didn't have parents who had healthy boundaries with their marriage, with their friends, with their work, with their money spending, with their own relationship with that family member. So learning about how, oh man, boundaries is deep, because like and we're going to get into it a little bit further into the course when we get into the case studies, but I've recently had some incredibly challenging experiences with people who were crossing my boundary, and I had the language. I definitely felt in my right to implement the boundary, but I still had incredibly strong visceral responses because, and this is how you can lean into understanding a client's resistance to doing something. I, at my core, am afraid of losing connection because my mother abandoned me when I was 12. So anytime I implement a boundary, even if it's somebody that I don't value, that I don't know, it's burned into my autonomic system that this could challenge your ability to stay connected. This is a subconscious response to boundaries that I've made conscious through doing my trauma work. So I can say, I see you shaking. I see you not sleeping. I see you being in your fear. I see you racing thoughts. And I can label you appropriately. I can practice mindfulness and create separation between that story or that trauma response and what I actually need to do right now to create safety for myself. Okay, so boundaries is a really nuanced It's not a harsh, it's not a harsh thing always. It's often a meeting place for people to understand how to be in relationship and stay safe. And sometimes it's a boundary where you're ending the relationship, whatever relationship it is, family, romantic, platonic, doesn't matter. So it's up to us to decide, is this a soft conversation where we're creating a meeting place and I'm just expressing my needs and boundaries? Or is this a harsh boundary where it is no más? I just got that tattooed on the back of my arm. No más in Spanish. No more. Done. And then we practice self-care or aftercare, because it can be really fucking vulnerable when we walk away from situations that don't serve us. And then acceptance of what is. You know, we as humans make a lot of excuses for our trauma. It wasn't that bad. Other people had it worse. Who am I to own this as a trauma? Because a lot of times what happens is we start to own our trauma, and our close network will say, they'll invalidate us because they haven't done their trauma work. And we go, whoa, 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 am I completely out of line for stating this boundary or this need or expressing my experience? No, they're just an unsafe person. You do not want to be vulnerable with people who cannot honor your acceptance of your trauma. Okay, I think that's a little toxic, or very toxic. And then as coaches, we want to be transparent. You know, I think we can often shy away from difficult conversations because it makes us uncomfortable. And we don't yet know the language. We don't know how to move through the conversation where we're honoring them. It's a safe space. We're talking a little slower, right? Where we're not invalidating. We're completely present to what comes up for them. Those are the strengths that we can develop as coaches to hold space in a trauma-informed way. So being transparent to our practices, timelines, what we charge, right? How they can expect, like managing expectations, how they can expect, you know, our coaching or our accessibility to us after the initial coaching container finishes or program finishes, right? We want to be transparent and equip them with information so that they feel resourced, they feel in the know. Remember, trauma is what happens when it's too much, too fast, too soon. So if we're not pre-qualifying a client, I have a colleague who went through her own, I'm not going to say her name, obviously, but went through her own chronic illness recovery journey in the functional medicine world. And there was no talk from the doctor to her about how much the testing was going to cost. And she got a $40,000 bill for all of the functional testing. And she shared with me how that landed on her physiology. And I thought, how are you, a chronic illness practitioner who's not showing up in these trauma-informed ways to help the client be in their window of tolerance through the whole process? We have to be transparent, we have to pre-qualify, and we have to have the money talks, right? It's the sticky stuff that we try to avoid, but that's our own trauma. We need to figure that out. And then clear service agreements. In my onboarding call, I learned with my coaches, I learned the value of slowly and thoroughly going through a service agreement. The client has to know what they're getting from you and what you have, what's available to them, right? Because otherwise they're like, well, I don't know when I can check in. You know, they message you on a weekend and you're like, bitch, I don't work on the weekend. They're like, whoa, what? Like, fuck, I feel like an idiot now, right? So it's be very clear as to how this relationship can work, and also your commitment to anything that might come up that isn't in that service agreement, right? Holding space for what is, acceptance, being present. Okay. I was geeking out in that photo. Jesse Moo took that of me here in Costa Rica recently. I was having a good old fashioned geek out right there. So in the trauma-informed coaching container, this is where I was saying at the beginning of the lecture today that this is where we get into the nitty-gritty. Okay, this is where we start to troubleshoot, where we identify specific trauma patterns and we have strategy to move through it. Okay. So, oh my God, I'm so excited. Ah, okay, hold on, let me just take some water. I'm just gonna check the chat box because I have a feeling you guys are being really cute. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Geech. Yeah, she loves every photo. That was a good photo shoot. Oh my God. Okay, exciting, exciting. So I'm excited because the polyvagal theory is something that completely transformed my life, both as a human being and a practitioner. It is a roadmap for trauma and understanding which parts of the brain are activated and how that communicates to our body. And then also how our body communicates to our brain through the vagus nerve, okay, through our enteric nervous system. It's fascinating. And it might feel completely overwhelming and too much and too sciencey for some of you. And I understand, I feel you. I avoided learning about the polyvagal theory until I absolutely had to, because it just seemed so overwhelming and complex. But it's actually an art form, I think. There's an art to being a trauma-informed practitioner using the polyvagal theory to coach our clients. And we're going to get into a few other aspects of the pathophysiology of trauma. So pathophysiology of trauma just means how it shows up in our physiology. How is it impacting our immune system, our digestive function, our ability to detox and repair, you know, cellular metabolism, genetic expression. All of these things are impacted by stress. If you've ever heard those news stories, you know, and they say, oh, stress has been researched to be the #1 cause of, you know, metabolic disease. And it's like, yep, stress definitely is the trigger. So, you know, trauma can also be periods of intense stress. Trauma can be working in a really high stress job with not enough time to rest and recover. We get into that in the training. It's called allostatic load, and how allostatic load therefore affects our ability to run the machine internally well or not. Okay, so the pathophysiology of trauma is really important to understand as practitioners, whether you're a nutritionist, you know, a physician of some sort, an osteopath, a personal trainer, a massage therapist, you know, a past life regression coach. Like, it doesn't matter what you do. If you're looking to help people feel resourced to heal their own trauma, understanding how it impacts their physiology and learning how to explain it to them is the single-handedly most important piece of helping people tease it apart, to create separation between the experience and what's actually happening, right? Because we identify with the experience. How many of my clients have identified with being all of the things that their trauma brain makes up about how they're showing up after trauma? Because they don't know that it's a series of chemical reactions. They think it's their lack of ability to do something. It's a personality trait. It's something that they just weren't, you know, born with or gifted with. And it's like, no, we show up how we modeled other people show up. So if we can learn about their trauma and learn about how they grew up and how safe they felt growing up and how, you know, healthy their relationships were, then we can start to understand why they might be constantly in a state of fight or flight or dissociation. and then teach them the skills on how to get back into their window of tolerance, because it's not a personality trait. It's not forever. We're dynamic. Neuroplasticity is a thing. Neuroplasticity is a wonderful thing that we're going to use as trauma-informed practitioners. Okay. So the polyvagal theory basically is a roadmap of understanding how stress affects the nervous system, and in turn, our visceral organ function and immune function. Okay. Then epigenetics. So I use genetics testing with some of my clients, the ones that really want to understand kind of the root. The thing about genetics is that it's a possibility. It's not what is. It's not like doing blood work where you're like, okay, your levels are blah, 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 blah. It's not a diagnosis. It's this is what could happen, worst case scenario. Okay. So when they come to me, if they have it in the budget to do genetic testing and they want to understand why their methylation sucks, why they're predisposed to addiction, right? These are all things that we can use genetic testing to understand how many copies of that gene do they have? Do they have 0? Do they have 1? Do they have 2? If they have 2, and it's something that helps to upregulate methylation, which is amazing for people to stay out of, chronic illness. That's great, right? But they might be lacking the enzyme that helps dopamine bind in the brain for long periods of time. So they go for reward-seeking behavior, drugs, alcohol, gambling, sex, social media, smoking, if they were raised in an environment that's how people coped with their stress. But what we have the opportunity to do is to say, hey, here's your genetic results for mood and executive functioning. You actually have only 1 copy or 0 copies of this gene. And that's why you might be predisposed to go and try and self-regulate with things that raise your dopamine, shopping, right? Like anonymous sex. There's no shame in what it is. It's a way for us to self-regulate based on our genetics and our stress stimuli. So the epigenetic piece is what is, I would say, more important. So the epigenetics is how our environment is affecting our genes. So what in our environment could slow genes down that we want working faster, or upregulate genes that we really don't want working faster? That would be stress and trauma responses, things that are happening too much, too fast, too soon. Remember, the nervous system is connected to everything: your skin, your fascia, your visceral organs, your blood pressure, your blood sugar balance. So if we're in a trauma response and we're presenting with chronic illness, what do we have to do? Are we overloading them with supplements and restrictive medical diets and, extensive lifestyle, like long meditations and breathe? Like meditations would be the thing that we want to incorporate. But no, we want to first teach them how to ground so that their nervous system is innervating their cells with positive information, as opposed to upregulating adrenaline, upregulating cortisol, creating lots of inflammation in the body in preparation for this fight, secreting lots of glucose from the liver into the bloodstream, which, if that's happening all the time and they have a genetic predisposition to insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, what do you think is going to happen? That's how disease presents, because it's a chronic stress response that they're not grounding in. And that turns genes on because the biochem is dysregulated. So it's all about learning how their environment is affecting their physiology. And then understanding how toxicity and infections will elicit a trauma response. So, I'll speak for myself. Growing up with a mentally ill and addicted, severely alcoholic mother, and then my dad, who's just completely like, I don't know, he's just kind of in his own world, and that's his trauma response. but I didn't have anybody protecting me and advocating for me while they were working their shit out, which was not in a healthy way. And I was always under stress. And I developed mold toxicity in an old moldy farmhouse that we lived in. And I developed all of these food intolerances and chronic constipation. And then I started drinking and using drugs to try and regulate the pain and the discomfort. Right? So then I became toxic. I wasn't eliminating. My visceral organ function was shut down because I was always in a trauma response. So my gut couldn't process foods. My liver couldn't process, right? The mold moved in and started attacking my kidneys, started attacking my immune system, all of the mucosal lining in my brain, in my lungs, in my gut, in my vaginal canal, right? I've had so many traumas because I was under chronic stress as a young kid, and it created the perfect storm for toxicity and infections to wreak havoc. And I'm 40 years old, and I'm just starting to create some bandwidth, right? So when we're meeting people who have a long history of trauma that started back when they were children, it's important for us to teach them how this happened, how their current environment might trigger another trauma response, and then also like how to effectively detox and repair without causing further trauma, right? Like my colleague who went to the doctor and got a $40,000 bill for her fucking testing. There's a lot we can do without $40,000 of testing, right? And this is where we really need to challenge our practitioners who are coming in with this non-trauma informed, approach to helping people with chronic illness. And then learning about the gut-brain axis. So chronic stress and trauma and, unideal epigenetic environments will and can and will lead to leaky organs. So I don't say leaky gut, leaky organs, because leaky gut is kind of like the show pony, right? It's like everybody's talking about leaky gut, leaky gut, leaky gut. Well, guess what? If there's leaky gut, y'all got leaky organs in general. It's not just the digestive system that zonulin affects. It's also affecting our brain, the membrane that surrounds our brain and protects our brain, the membrane that protects our gallbladder, our kidneys, our liver, our lungs. So again, going back to genetically, what are they predisposed to? If they've experienced chronic stress and therefore experience a lot of toxicity and infections, and they develop leaky organs, that is causing afferent signaling to the brain that we're under attack, we're under threat. And guess what that's going to do? It's going to continue that figure 8 process of what came first, the chicken or the egg? Was it the original trauma or the acquired infections and toxicity that leads to more trauma in the brain and body? So understanding functional approaches to healing the body, right? And that's where the 6-month clinic mentorship comes in after the training, because I want to teach everybody who's using blood work and functional labs or symptomology intakes on how to show up in a trauma-informed way, both in how we're explaining things and coaching them through it, and how we're implementing protocols, right? That's really, really important. And then our neurotransmitters are primarily produced in the gut. So if somebody has an inflamed gut, a leaky gut, a gut with lots of pathogens, opportunistic pathogens, those opportunistic pathogens, when they run rampant in the colon, that's where our neurotransmitter production happens. So they start producing more stress-based neurotransmitters where they can't downregulate. They're high anxiety. They can't sleep. They have no bandwidth. They're at their max. People are on their last nerve, not because they're inherently assholes or intolerant, right? We're separating the fact they are not, it's not a personality trait. We are, in essence, when we're healthy and regulated and connected, we're happy. We're able to hold space. We laugh. We're able to create. We want to have fun. But when people are black and white and rigid and intolerant and anxious and resistant, we have to know on a biochemical level, they might not be operating with the full gamut. And either we have the opportunity to help them fill that in through a functional approach to healing, or we refer out and we refer to somebody who we trust and we know can take care of them while we help with our specific niche, whether that be massage or personal training or life coaching or whatever the case might be. Okay. And then what happens when we have a leaky and inflamed gut that's filled with toxins? Well, we get nutrient imbalances, because in a healthy gut, we're able to take the beautiful macro and micronutrition that we're eating and effectively digest and absorb it. But if our visceral organ function sucks because we're in a chronic stress response, we're not going to be absorbing that nutrition. And guess who does absorb that nutrition? The pathogens. And that's what creates, hi, Kayla. Hi, baby. Can you put your mic on mute, my love, please? Yeah. So we can overload them with, multivitamins, or, oh, your vitamin D's low, your iron's low. Oh, fuck. I'm not even going to get into that right now, because that is a whole other game. But when we start chasing the nutrient imbalances that might come up in a blood report or a lab report, yeah, we're helping. We want to create a bridge. We do want to up the type of nutrients that they need, but we also want to work on improving their gut absorption, and not just absorption, but how well is their pancreas secreting enzymes? What's their pancreatic exocrine function like? What's their biliary function like? How cholinergic are they? Can they take choline from the healthy fats, the omegas, the essential fatty acids? Can they actually take that fat and digest it and absorb it to support the brake pedal system of the nervous system, right? If they're not digesting and absorbing their proteins, fats, and carbs, those are the macronutrients, and then obviously minerals to support the processes. But those are the macronutrients that help us to build our hormones, to build our neurotransmitters, to support the vagus nerve, to build a brake pedal in the nervous system. Okay, so I strongly, strongly encourage everybody to learn, if this feels of interest to you, if this works with your business model, to learn about functional gut health and how to walk somebody through a proper detox and repair protocol. So the polyvagal theory, I like to always start with inviting you to think of it as a 3-step ladder. Okay, so let's say you're facing a wall, you're looking at the wall, and there's these 3 steps with, a couple feet in between each one. The dorsal vagal branch of the polyvagal theory is the bottom branch. Okay, it's the bottom step. And it presents with a lot more than these symptoms, but I only put a few. But it has an energy. A dorsal vagal response is like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. He's down, he's slow, he's depressed, he's apathetic, he's there, but he's not really there. And also fawning. Fawning is a more recent discovery of our fight, flight, freeze response. They've also added fawning now. Fawning, I am a fawner. I remember I wrote a poem when I was 13 years old, said it was about, I am a comfort junkie is what it was called. And I talked about being a chameleon. I knew at 13 years old, and I judged myself. That was my trauma. I judged myself so much. I hated myself, just a year after my mom left, of course. And I would morph to secure connection. And I would abandon my own needs to secure friendships, romantic relationships. I was deathly afraid of being left. So you can start to see when people are behaving in certain ways, how it correlates to the dorsal vagal branch, the mobilized branch, or the ventral vagal branch. And we're going to get into this in depth in my upcoming course, the 12-week trauma-informed practitioner course. But this is where like thyroid might be low. This is where people might be constipated. This is where people might not have energy to get up and go to work, or to get up and care for their child the way that they want to. There's no shame in how we're responding. It literally is a biochemical response based on our stimuli and our past experiences. So nature shares this branch with us. It's the oldest branch of the nervous system, the oldest branch of the nervous system. It is well ingrained in our responses to our environment. And if you see a frog jumping and they see you and they freeze, they're in a dorsal vagal response. You know, I see crabs every day by the beach. They see me and my dog and they freeze. That's a dorsal vagal response. Okay. So I don't want to jump ahead. Okay. So then there's the mobilized branch, which is the next step up. We get to the middle branch, and that's where we're feeling a lot. It's like, things are happening. We have cortisol, we have adrenaline, we have glucose being secreted into the blood to fuel a potential need to fight or flee. We will feel anxiety, because anxiety is your physiology getting ready to either fight or flee. So somebody who might be stuck in a mobilized trauma response, my personal experience with that was the endless amount of years that I tried to be a yogi and a meditator, and I couldn't fucking do it. I would walk out of the class. I would visualize my escape. I would get angry at the facilitators and the teachers for no reason. I just hated them. I felt trapped. And I hated myself for not being somebody who could access those ways to heal. I, in turn, went to orthorexia, body dysmorphia, bodybuilding, extreme exercise and dieting, because I felt more safe being in action. I was in a mobilized response. So when we have clients who are resistant to meditation, to breath work, like think about Wim Hof breathing. When you prescribe Wim Hof breathing to somebody as a way to self-regulate, but they have a history of trauma where hyperventilating might elicit an unconscious, subconscious trauma response, and they avoid it, and we label them as resistant or problematic or procrastinators, that's an opportunity for us to show up in a more trauma-informed way and lean into it. If they want to go there, lean into it. What about that felt uncomfortable? What about that, what thoughts or belief systems about yourself came up when you met the resistance? And how can I empower you or offer the information on the pathophysiology of trauma so you can create space between that story that you are broken, or you're incapable, or you're not good enough, right? And then sleeplessness. You're a sitting duck. If you're sleeping, but your autonomic system has gone through so much trauma that it needs to keep you awake pretty much all the time, and we're not validating that experience or that truth or that possibility, but we're giving sleep aids, sleep medication, this and that. It's any assistance work is a bridge. It's not a fix, it's a bridge. So there's no bad when it comes to pharma or supplements or anything that we do. It's whatever's going to help the client get into their window of tolerance so that they can do the work to self-heal. Okay. And then we have the ventral vagal response. And this is where we want to be most of our time. Okay. Think of a vent opening up. It's airy. Things are moving. It's good. It feels good. We're airing it out. Right. And that is where we are accessing our prefrontal cortex. Okay. If you want to get into the nitty gritty of all of this, like the physiology and all of these speaking points in more detail, it's going to be in the course. I swear these are not just like, I'm not just trying to plug, you guys. I'm just letting you know, if you want to elaborate on this and get more in depth into this, it will all be in depth in the upcoming coaching course, November 17th. But the prefrontal cortex is where we are problem solving. It's where our memory comes back. It's where we can learn. It's called executive function. We're also socially engaged. So I can't tell you how many times I went to parties or social situations and I had to be medicated. I self-medicated. Weed, alcohol, drugs, real fun party drugs that could allow me to access my social engagement system because I felt safe. Right? So again, destigmatizing self-regulating practices that people use. We're all just trying to feel okay. So if we're actually feeling okay, we can be socially engaged. We can share stories. We can hear somebody's experience, share a laugh, be in our bodies, not feel anxiety, enjoy that connection, possibly fall in love, fall in like, right? But the interesting thing from a functional point of view is it's also where methylation is happening really well. Methylation is, in essence, our body's ability to detox and repair. So our gut's functioning, our pancreas is secreting enzymes, our gallbladder is pushing out bile, our villi are able to absorb, our gut's absorbing nutrition. So we're digesting, we're detoxing, and we're repairing. So if we have clients who are chronically in a dorsal vagal response or a mobilized response, and they want to get healthy, right, quote unquote healthy, whatever that looks like for each individual person, but they want to heal, they need to be in a ventral vagal response predominantly. So it's up to us to teach them to recognize when they're in a dorsal vagal or mobilized response and give them the strategies and the tools, both mindset and in behaviors, to get into their window of tolerance, their ventral vagal state, where all the magic happens, right? And that's where life starts to feel safe again. People start to feel safe. Risk starts to feel safe. I would encourage you to check out Dr. Stephen Porges and his research on the polyvagal theory. And he started it with babies. That I get into in depth in the training because it is fascinating to understand our nervous systems, both in utero and then once we're on the other side, and how it's impacted by our experiences. It's so freaking cool. But Dr. Stephen Porges is a boss. I love him. So this is a little kind of visual worksheet thingy that I created a couple years ago when I launched Control Alt Delete, which is my group trauma recovery program. And it was a way for people to kind of, you can ask clients to save this on their phone and refer to it if they're ever confused as to which polyvagal. Oh, I want to say one more thing about this. This is a really important piece. So if you have a client who's stuck in a dorsal vagal response, they're more apathetic, dissociated, depressed, and they want to get ventral. They really want to heal. They're like, I want my life back. I want to feel like myself again. We can't effectively get them ventral unless we support them in the experience of feeling their emotions. They have to get mobilized. They have to cross that second ladder in order to reach the vented area. So that means stepping out of dissociation by creating safety, giving them resources, aftercare, right? So that they can actually face the scary feeling that they've been trying to fucking avoid their whole lives, right? Because the original insult feels like we could have died. And I mean that wholeheartedly. A child on an autonomic level whose parent didn't show up for them in times where it really mattered to them. Based on evolution, our autonomic system is going to perceive that as possible abandonment and death. If we're not our parents' number one or our caretakers' number one priority, nature knows that you're more vulnerable to be eaten or to starve, right? So we are still very primal beings. As much as our consciousness is rising and we're growing, into God knows what we're growing into. I mean, fuck, who knows? But like, it's pretty cool. Our consciousness is really rising. We still have these reptilian parts of the body that are rooted in evolution. And we have to learn how to work symbiotically with them as opposed to deny them. The more we deny it, it's like pushing a beach ball under the water. The more you push it down, the bigger the explosion's going to be. So it's normalizing the sensation of reliving the trauma and really helping them through that in order to access ventral vagal. So this is the comfort zone. This is your ventral vagal state. You know, you're in your window of tolerance. You're able to self-soothe. You feel resourced. You feel really good. And the hyper aroused is our fight or flight response, right? So they present with these presentations: OCD, rigidness, overeating, restricting, addictions, anger and rage, outbursts, chaotic responses, overwhelm, anxiety. These are just a few. We all know there are many, many more presentations of being in a fight or flight response. But then we also have the hypo-aroused, the freeze response, right? Where you're on autopilot. You feel disconnected. You don't display any emotions. You're apathetic about things. You feel disconnected and lonely, right? Poor memory. You're shut down. You're unavailable, not present. You know, if you're a teacher and you have people who are spacing out, it's not personal. They could possibly be in a trauma response. So how do we create safety for them? And how do we resource them to create safety so that they're back in their comfort zone? Right. So these are some of the tools: clearing infections, deep diaphragmatic breathing, managing limbic system responses, making new choices. Right. So we have lots of opportunity to coach. That's just another way of looking at it. Hypoactivation. So if you see physiological processes that are rooted in slowing down, hypothyroid, constipation, depression, they're in a dorsal vagal response. Window of tolerance is where they're disease-free, maybe symptom-free or minimal symptoms. They're feeling really good. Hyperactivation might be hyperthyroid, loose stool, chronic loose stool. It might be sleeplessness. It might be an inability to focus in class or focus on a conversation. How many times do we feel invalidated by our counterpart, whether it be a friend or a romantic partner or a teacher, if they're not present to our experience, but they're in a hyperactivation trauma response and we take it personally, right? So like I said, doing our own trauma work really does help us to show up in a more effective way for our clientele, but it is vast. It is vast, but it starts to create patterns. You recognize the patterns of these things, and then you're like, you don't even have to study it anymore. It's like tying your shoelaces. At first, you have to go slowly and learn the rhyme and the bunny loop, and you're really focused, and you're pissed if anybody tries to help you. You're like, I got this. And then eventually, you're doing it while talking on the phone and not even being present, because you just know how to do it. And it's the same thing with anything, but trauma work as well. I get into the vagus nerve in depth in the training. I've only skimmed on it today, but the vagus nerve is basically the connection between the brain and the body. It's called cranial nerve X. It starts at the base of the brain and it innervates your face. It connects to your ears, your ability to hear, your vocal cords, your ability to speak. Like my vagus nerve was not doing really great at the beginning of this talk. My voice was really shaky. My body was shaky. I was excited. I was nervous. So it presents in different ways, right? Like it allows you to smile if somebody's safe. Part of our social engagement system is to recognize somebody's facial expressions or body language, and our autonomic system processes all of that information without us consciously needing to. And then it spits out a response. You either cross the street if somebody is walking in a way that feels threatening, or you leave the room if somebody's talking in a way that's triggering, right? Your vagus nerve is receiving, it's a process called neuroception, where your nervous system is constantly surveilling its environment and processing that information and making decisions that present as behaviors, right? And they are behaviors, but it's unconscious most often until we make it conscious. So recognizing the signs of the vagus nerve being dysregulated, that's one really, really great way to help our clients to understand where their power lies when it comes to strengthening the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve becomes strengthened when we have safe and fulfilling relationships, when we experience joy. It's our brake pedal system in the nervous system. If our vagus nerve is atrophied because we've had a lot of trauma and or infections and toxicity in the body, then we're really only pushing on the gas pedal of this Porsche 911 that can drive really fast, right? And based on our genetics, it's going to present in different ways. You might label somebody as psycho, right? Maybe that person's fucking psycho. Well, are they just lacking vagal tone? Are they lacking down-regulating neurotransmitters? Are they lacking the ability to tap into their executive function, their prefrontal cortex, because they're in a continuous trauma response, right? So this is how we really can serve some valuable information to our clients in a coaching container to teach them about why these presentations are happening and where they have opportunity to get back into their window of tolerance so that their heart rate's regulated, their liver function is regulated, their gut is able to digest and assimilate, inflammation goes down, their brain functions well, their memory comes back, they're able to access joy and laughter again, right? Their blood pressure regulates. How many people are on blood pressure medication these days? So it's not like I don't shit on pharmaceuticals. I think that there's a time and place for them 100%, but we can really serve our clients well by doing this groundwork. The nervous system controls everything. So epigenetics, trauma, and chronic illness. So we touched on genetics. These are just a few definitions. We are each encoded with genetics, which are passed down to us, though we are not our genetics. So as I said, it's kind of like a worst case scenario or best case scenario situation, but it's not a diagnosis when we get our genetic test results. Epigenetics, there's not really testing. There is a place in the UK that does it, and they approached me and it's thousands and thousands of dollars. I don't think it's needed. We can understand epigenetics just by understanding somebody's lifestyle. How healthy are your relationships? How healthy is your relationship with money, right? Are you eating good food, toxin-free food on the regular? Are you giving yourself enough time to repair, to rest, to just enjoy life? Or are you working all the time, right? And what happens is when we run out of bandwidth, and I mentioned this earlier, allostatic load is the medical term for our bandwidth in the nervous system. When we run out of it's too high, that's when we see our cellular function go down, right? Mitochondrial function goes down. Our cell lipid layer is threatened. So we can't get nutrition in and we can't detox well. And then foreign invaders come in and attach to our DNA, like heavy metals and mold. So yeah, like we can definitely work on stress management, but then we also want to understand how do we functionally support the cell so that the cell can repair and match our work that we're doing emotionally and mentally to get everything back online. So the gut-brain axis is basically that, the vagus nerve, the connection between your gut, your adrenals, your pancreas, gallbladder, all of the organs that make up the gut, but then also how it's feeding information to our brain. And then vice versa, it's bidirectional. It's called afferent and efferent signaling. So the afferent signaling is everything that's going to the brain, So if we have immune cells, we have immune cells that are traveling through our blood, our cells, they're picking up information about heavy metals, about breast implants, about screws and plates in the body, about, infections, different chemicals, and it's going to relay that information back to the brain. And the brain's going to go, okay, we need to mount an immune response. We need to raise inflammation. We need to conserve valuable energy by shutting down digestion and detox so that we can fight this fight, right? That's a problem. We got to clean up the environment. We have to somatically experience and move those neurochemicals that are discharged when we're under stress and trauma. We have to learn how to, and these are things, this isn't groundbreaking stuff. This is stuff we've been doing for hundreds of thousands of years. We've just forgotten it. We've learned the art of self-regulation because we live in this weird model now where it's like work, 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 TV, get drunk, get fucked up, don't talk about anything, have meaningless relationships rooted in, it's just fucked now. So we really do. And I think that's why I take such a strong stance politically also, because I understand, I use my voice as a functional trauma therapist in politics as well, because it's the politics that are affecting our tribes. It's the politics that are affecting our families and our communities, our ability to access safety. And I'm pissed because I'm like, you're trying to pull the fucking wool over everybody's eyes, but we're on to you. And this has got to flip. This has got to flip because our organs know how to function. We're not broken. The body's not confused. It's responding to threat. We are under threat when we're disconnected from our tribe. The lockdowns exacerbated this polyvagal theory response that we already had traumas going into it. And then this just, no wonder the world has been on fire, because the basic needs that our nervous system have of safety, transparency, agency, sovereignty are not being met, and the body responds in kind. So it's up to us to first start with ourselves, to find our sovereignty, to find our agency, our words, our boundaries, our belief systems that are rooted not in a trauma response, but from our core belief systems, and not apologize for it, because we're reparenting ourselves then, right? We're reparenting our society. So they'll model us. We give other people permission to do it when we do it in a safe way. So how to be a safe point for co-regulation for our clients? There's a few points here. So to functionally teach and understand the body and its susceptibilities, limitations, and trigger pullers, we can empower our clients to separate from the story that is they are broken and unlovable or unfixable, right? It's one thing to tell somebody, you need to stop thinking you're broken and unlovable and unfixable in order to heal. And it's another thing to teach them why they might be presenting in those ways and how they can effectively work through them. It's not a light switch. We're not going to be able to just plug and play. It's a nurturing. We're lacking nurturing. We're lacking education. And that's what we have the opportunity to provide for our clients. Support them in developing agency and autonomy based on healthy modeling, an evidence-based approach versus cheerleading. The autonomic nervous system has that function called neuroception. Dr. Stephen Porges coined the term. The nervous system is receiving about 2 million bits of information every single second, but our cognitive brain is only processing about 150 of them, roughly. So if you're saying something like, you got this, just like, I can't even think of just cheerleading terms. But their nervous system senses that it's a empty calorie of sorts because they're not actually learning how to get it. Their autonomic nervous system through neuroception knows that. Their conscious mind might not know it, but their body knows it. And that can create a sense of distrust. That can further reinforce the idea that somebody's fucking with them, right? So by educating them and really teaching the pathophysiology, and then teaching them, hey, this is how, if you want to get this meeting, if you want to nail this meeting, if you want to nail this presentation, if you blah, 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 you are meeting them as their ally, as their teammate, not as their hierarchical, do as I say kind of person. You're meeting them at the point of fear where they shut down and say, let's tease this apart. What about this is true? Why do you think that's there? How is it protecting you? And what can we do to create safety in the moment so that you can access different ways of perceiving yourself and the situation? That's the difference between trauma-informed care and cheerleading. C, we actively participate in the social change of reducing and eliminating the stigmatization of common trauma presentations. Mental health shaming is body shaming. Right? So if somebody needs to use pharmaceuticals to not commit suicide, that's amazing. If somebody needs to smoke weed or have empty sex, or this, and this is the thing that we really challenge codependency in this as a trauma-informed practitioner, because it's not up to us to judge how they're staying alive, how they're staying resourced. It's so not up to us. It's not our place at all. Our place is to validate, acknowledge, teach why this might be happening and how to, and other alternative strategies should they choose to. But really understanding that they are doing what they need to do to be okay, and it has nothing to do with us in personal relationships and in professional relationships. Breaking the stigmas, holding space, acknowledging, validating, accepting. These are very regulating approaches to the coaching container. And then D, continuously asking permission throughout your relationship. So some people, like Gigi and I at the beginning, when we first started working together, I was like, if this feels available to you, can you do this? Are you open to doing this? Would it be fun for you to do this? And eventually she was like, I want to do it all. Just fucking tell me, I'll do it. And I was like, okay, at that point, I've been given permission to just speak as it is, as I need it to be. But until then, there's no hierarchical system. We are all the same. Respect, acknowledgement, right? Asking permission. Hey, if the client is still fragile and you're a year into the coaching container, you're still asking. I shouldn't say fragile, but you know what I mean. You're still asking permission to give them feedback, because they might not be in a place where they can hear your judgment of them because they had a judgmental parent or a narcissistic parent that invalidated their truth. Maybe they just need to be heard for like 2 fucking years. It takes time to rebuild that safety between two people where they can start to experience humans in a different way and let go of the story that people aren't safe. We have to continuously create the safety for them. Okay, so those are some more ways. Oh my God, okay, this is really fun. So, okay, we're like, okay, so case studies. This is hilarious. So let's take a few of my very recent interactions with non-trauma informed practitioners and unpack how their communication could elicit a trauma response in a client. This is where I will invite you to unmute yourself if you would like to share your opinions, how you're receiving these interactions, and based on the polyvagal theory, you can chime in and tell me what you're thinking about these. These really hilarious, I'm sorry, it's really funny. Okay. So spiritual bypassing is one specific non-trauma informed approach to the coaching container. Okay. And it can really damage our clients. So the case study we're about to do is really about spiritual bypassing. So that's why I brought this up. So spiritual bypass or spiritual bypassing is a tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, and unfinished developmental tasks. The term was introduced in the mid-1980s by John Wellwood, a Buddhist teacher and psychotherapist. So this is where the just be positive, just be grateful. Why are you being negative? Somebody sharing their experience, or coming in saying, I know more than you do because I'm more spiritual or I'm more connected. I know more about you than you do. Let me tell you about you. That is a major boundary cross. Major, 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 major. So I had somebody DM me a couple of days ago, got this nice message. I woke up to it. It was lovely. Grand Rising, love. Cool, Grand Rising. I was like, hey, Gorge, how are you, sweet sis? I love when people DM me. If you're nice, I'm like into it. How you doing, love? Oh, I'm so good. About to shoot on the beach. How are you? I'm good, doing very good. Thank you. My energy is very high today. If you don't mind me considering you for a reading, my love. Now, I've never spoken to this person before. I don't know what she does for a living. And I start giggling. I'm receiving this message and I'm giggling. I'm like, oh my God, she's like fun. And I like her approach. It's kind of like, you know, it's cool. Then she writes, my spirit is really high and drawn to you and has really revealed a lot about you to me. And I jotted them down. My spirit energy says you're doing well, but you need guidance. Do you want text, voice, or FaceTime reading? Let's do a general life reading. I'm going to need your date of birth and a picture of your right palm. You do know that I charge for this, right? No. So my first response was, I started leaving a voice note, and I deleted it because I was like, this is not going to go well. I am mobilized. I am defensive. I feel I do not like anybody speaking to who I am without permission. I'll ask you if I want your opinion. I'll ask you if I want your help. If you tell me who I am or you know something about me and I need to pay you to gain access to that knowledge, you can fuck right off. And that is a completely normal boundary. Fuck off. So I didn't respond to her because I had nothing nice to say and I didn't want to intensify this situation. So I'm going to open up the floor to anybody who would like to unpack this with me. Feel free to turn your mic on and give your opinion as to what was happening here. Where was
Cass, it's Kayla.
Who is that? Kayla, what's up, mama?
Hi, I'm so sorry about coming on earlier with the mute thing. It went on by itself. I feel like it has a mind of its own, crazy thing. I was sitting here with half the boob out because I had my video open.
Anyways, Kayla just had a beautiful baby. Yeah. No worries, babe. No worries.
I feel like there's a lot of manipulation happening in this thread because it's like the dangling carrot. I have something that maybe you want, and it's imposing information it's going in with a perceived notion that you want this without actually asking for permission. So she goes in with the applied assumption of, well, do you want voice text or FaceTime? That's already assuming that you've already given her permission that you even want something. So it's like a sleazy sales tactic. Don't even ask for the permission. Just give them what the options are. That's actually a mind technique that you use in NLP when you're trying to, infer a child to make a decision without giving them the actual options. It's like our government. You either wear a mask or you get a jab. Well, isn't the option to not get a jab or go maskless, right? And so that's the same thing. It's like, well, I'm not going to give you an option to turn down my services. You have to just choose whether you want me to, relay this information via text, voice, or FaceTime. And the conversation wasn't even a back and forth dialogue. If you could imagine how this would be like in an actual coffee shop situation, she'd be just like blowing at you. Like it'd be like a water hose in your face, right? Like there's no back and forth dialogue. She didn't give you a chance to even like respond back after like my spirit was really drawn to you. She could have stopped, but it kept going on and, you know, offering this energy and then telling you what she needed. And then, by the way, I charge for this. So this was her smothering you without, this is not a two-way conversation. And I feel like someone who maybe growing up didn't really have a voice, you know, it doesn't like confrontation, would really like feel nervous to not, you know, maybe offend this person and just do it because they don't have the confidence to say, hey, listen, like I actually didn't mean to like give you the idea that I wanted this. Like, I'm not really down for this reading right now. Like, no, thank you. Right. And so you're really, you know, hooking somebody in who doesn't feel confident to like you said, have a boundary set or, you know, use their voice to say this actually makes me feel very uncomfortable and like, no, thanks.
Hit the nail on the head. And then I decided as a trauma-informed victim of trauma, I decided I don't need to have this conversation with this person. I don't need to explain my non-response.
Yep.
It doesn't make me a better person to respond to this.
Well, I learned no communication is communication. I had a really great counselor tell me that because I had a narcissistic, abusive relationship with an ex, and he was like, you know, Kayla, no communication is communication. By not responding to the copious amounts of emails and text messages and voicemails, by not saying anything, that is a response. He will get the message.
Exactly.
They don't deserve any more of your energy.
And it's like, yeah, yeah, I could go way deeper, but you nailed it. Not that I could go way deep. I would like to go deeper, but we're on a time restraint, and I want to respect everybody's time. I know a lot of you probably need to go in about 5 minutes, but there's not much more to cover if you can hang out for another 10, 15, including Q&A. Jessie Moo, I saw your hand go up.
And also I could wait till Q&A. So you can let me know.
Yeah, go for it now. We're on.
Okay. So something that came up for me as I wonder, because I hear so much like responsibility of her reaching out, she's putting on spirit. So it's like, oh, I'm acting through spirit. And so that can be like a easily justified way to act however you want, because you're putting this, like, again, responsibility on something outside of yourself, right? And so that was one thing that came up. And then the second made me think of things like numerology or astrology or human design, where there's also this sort of, so, you know, she's telling you about yourself. And so when someone goes, oh, you're a manifesting generator, I know everything about you, like how that lands. Just like astrology, oh, you're a Leo, I know everything about you. And that, you know, whether it's in conversation, whether it's, you know, for like, let's say a human design practitioner or for a astrologer or any of these people who use, anyone who uses those tools, like how they would then communicate the awareness or like, let's say wisdom they have with their clients without imposing their own beliefs of who they are and how they show up. Is kind of like a question statement that I'm just
totally, because what comes up for me as I'm hearing you say that is it's like it steps into that hierarchical thing of I know more about you, I know more than you do. Let me tell you who you are. And Brene Brown has amazing lectures on this, is who I am is not on the table ever. If anybody starts telling me who I am, the conversation is done. But Jess knows, as my dear friend, I will ask her. I'll say, Jess, I really want your opinion on this. Do you think I'm fucking being an asshole? Do you think I'm missing the mark here? And that's a safe coaching container. That's a safe co-regulating container because we've asked permission and, we've asked for that feedback. And it's really important that people know their role when it comes to teaching and coaching, etc. So yeah, I agree. Thank you. This next one is going to blow your mind, guys. It's going to blow your mind. I swear, when it was coming up, I texted Gigi. I was like, girl, this never happens to me. And it's happening just before the masterclass as ammo, as great examples to show everybody what non-trauma informed care looks like. This is wild. Okay. So last week I had an interview with a very well-established functional psychiatrist in San Diego. And my mentor in Metabolic Solutions, my functional mentorship group, they connected me to this psychiatrist. And she's well-established. She helps people get off pharmaceutical antidepressants or avoid going on them altogether through amino acid therapy. And that's the next area in my practice that I'm going to be researching and implementing into my protocols. So she said, you're perfect for the job. I want you to join the team. I want you to start taking patients. And when we had our meeting, I really didn't like the way she was speaking to me. She was being condescending and patronizing, impatient. She was rude. She was straight up rude. This was the second call that we had. And I had my own trauma response. So I recognized that I'm in a trauma response. I knew I needed time to process it and develop the language. So I didn't say anything in the moment. And I took a day to really process it, both in my mind and in safe relationships from people that I value and trust. And I got clear on the language. So this is important because when people ask trauma victims to speak up for themselves in the moment, that's not a trauma-informed approach to understanding the time and space that people might need in order to process what was happening for them, especially if they're a dissociator. So I had a conversation with her through Zoom. I expressed to her, how that felt for me. She's a psychiatrist. And it was terrible. I'm not even going to get into the ins and outs because it doesn't matter. Her response when we wrapped the call was this email. So we can call it hierarchy, we can call it narcissism, we can call it a trauma response, whatever you want. But at the end of the day, this is an example of something that is 100% not okay. I wish you all the best. I will certainly pay attention to my interrupting and see if that's an issue for others. Sorry, I'm obviously still processing it because I'm like reacting. What's funny is my sister and I do that when we're on a roll and finish each other's thoughts. So then it's a good thing. Different family structures yield different patterns. But I hear you and realize that we all deserve to be fully heard to completion. And you felt dismissed and disrespected, like you were stupid. It's not how I felt at the time at all, just questioning why you were asking those questions. I could have asked more gently. Not being you, my response in the reverse role might have been, wait, sorry. This was part of the intake. We were talking about office business practices and intakes. Guess it sounded like I was actually asking you. And my response might have been, whoops, misinterpreted that. So thanks for clarifying. And I learned something about how I might be perceived by someone else and to be more sensitive to my tone. This is where it really started to become brutal. But walking on eggshells or lots of processing here is not an option for me. I prefer someone who matches my rhythm and meanings more closely. Interesting how that goes, eh? We do have our people who resonate well with us and others not so much. Life is complicated enough, so I prefer fewer challenges, variables in significant professional relationships. I really admire your accomplishments and would certainly have appreciated having your skills for my team. I've also had some thoughts that may be useful for you. I have found that trauma triggering threshold is raised by tending to pyroluria, score of 15 plus. It is remedied with B6, zinc, and borage oil. So she's diagnosing and treating me without my permission. She's comparing my experience to hers to rationale it, right? So there's this well, I can only acknowledge what I understand, right? So this is a perfect example of somebody in the mental health world who should be trauma informed and has absolutely no idea why I came to her with those concerns. And when I came to her with the concerns, I said, if somebody is cutting me off and being patronizing or condescending, I won't access executive function. And my job here is to be in executive function with your patients. So I'm asking if you are open to troubleshooting this because it's not landing well for me. And she made it clear, I'm not open to troubleshooting it. And this is what I think of you and your experience, and this is how I would fix it. So I turned down the job, obviously. But yeah, what do you think? Where are you guys? Anybody want to chime in on that? Share their opinion, their thoughts? It's pretty clear. I think I've said it too. She was diagnosing and treating me without my permission and invalidating my experience. Right? So it's so important if we're seeing somebody on our table, in our office, in a private room, online, and they're coming to us and they have resistance or they have needs that we might not understand, we might not agree with, we have to be able to tease that apart and knowing this is not about me. This is about me being able to understand this person, this patient, this client, and how I can support them through this presentation in a very respectful, trauma-informed, we're on a team sort of way so that they can actually access their prefrontal cortex, their anti-inflammatory pathways, their parasympathetic state, right? You just see how it's all connected. And don't worry if you're not getting the biochem right now, like if you don't have that knowledge already, it will be in the course. And we learn, just like the bunny ears for the shoelace. You just practice and you learn.
Cass, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Oh, like in that sense, because she's like this woman that you were speaking with, like she would have been very trauma informed as a practitioner, correct?
She was not trauma informed.
She wasn't.
No, she's a medical doctor.
Okay.
And she became a psychiatrist. She's been practicing since like the 60s.
And psychiatrists aren't trauma informed?
No.
What the fuck?
I'm telling you, some of the worst experience.
That's actually so much messed up because they're the frontline people who are working with the most traumatized, like individuals.
Well, we got to think psychiatrists are medical doctors that look for disease. They're not looking for prevention.
Right. They're looking to write a script.
They were looking to so her script was amino acids. So she sees herself as a functional practitioner because she's using functional approaches like lifestyle, diet, and amino acid therapy.
Right.
To treat instead of pharmaceuticals. But she's missing the coaching piece, the trauma-informed relating piece.
Yeah, that was bad.
It was bad.
I would have vomited after that email. Like, that is disgusting.
It was intense. And Gigi, she's not here anymore. I know she had to go to the vet with her cat, but Gigi was like, you can go on one more call just to like confirm that this woman is a complete narcissist. Like, go on one more call. But I'm telling you now, we already know.
Oh,
it's
no.
Not healthy. Yeah. And I was like, wow.
Would this be like, so Gigi mentioned like gaslighting is in an attempt to make other people feel crazy or stupid. Would this be a situation of that? Like, would you consider this a bit of gaslighting in the email?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would say so. Definitely.
Yeah.
Because, and this, when I reached out to Jess teaches a lot about the maiden, the mother, and the crone. Is it the crone, like feminine energy?
Oh, okay.
So, she's 75, trying to keep her practice in line. And I'm a young girl with a lot to offer. And I think there was a lot of threat. Like, she didn't like that I was so in my power.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, she didn't like being challenged.
She hadn't done her trauma work.
Well, most people don't we're so complacent as a society. People, it's rude. It's considered rude if you establish a boundary, right? That's why most people don't establish
Right.
boundaries, because it's considered being rude. Like, well, this person was so nice. They made you this food. This person's so nice. They wanted to give you a
Yes.
hug. And it's like, yeah, but I don't want these things. Well, don't be rude, right? And so, yeah, people. And then when you set a boundary, it's like, so people are like taken aback, or like, what? Like, what? You don't want to come work for me? You're not going to beg to have a seat at my
Right.
table? Yeah.
Exactly. And the thing about the polyvagal theory and evolutionary theory is the boundary and the fear of being rude is rooted in the deep autonomic programming that we might be ostracized from our tribe and therefore left for the dead.
Right.
This is not conscious. This is so subconscious.
Right.
So helping people understand your fear is based on evolution. It's you're not broken or shitty or a pushover. These are life-saving responses that have been around for hundreds of thousands of years. It's normal what you're doing. And let's figure out how to equip you so that you can create the boundary and be able to eat your dinner and digest it and go to sleep. You know?
Yeah.
Ariel, you had your hand up. Hi, Ariel and I have known each other for 20 years too. It's so great to see you here. Hi, babe.
So nice to see you. Thank you so much for this workshop. It's been amazing. And also thank you for sharing that story. I just had a question about, you mentioned, first of all, I'm a doula, like I'm a birth doula. So I work with pregnant people and in the birth space. So I love this story specifically because it sort of touches on a lot of what I see in my work with institutionalized healthcare and how we're sort of raised and sort of, or most of us are raised and trained to accept our doctor's orders without question, right? And so I see across the board with so many mamas that I work with a lot of trauma, whether that's like past birth trauma that they're working through in subsequent births and pregnancies and that kind of thing. And you mentioned like, okay, so we can't expect traumatized people to make a decision in the moment. Like we need time to process that. But sometimes in the birth space, it's required for them to make a decision like in the moment. And that's where I guess advocacy comes in. But I'm just trying, like, because sometimes it's inevitable. Like I can't speak up for or make a decision for anyone in the birth space. They have to make that decision for themselves, even though sometimes things can be triggering or traumatizing or bringing up past trauma. So I'm just wondering if you have any suggestions or tools or tips on sort of like how to navigate that when it does have to come up in the moment.
Yeah. So the theory behind that is rooted in co-regulation. So the power that being there with them and fully being present to their experience the whole way through, how that communicates to the nervous system through neuroception, that they are in fact safe and seen, right? But then also aftercare. So the ability to actually rest and repair afterward, that gets into the allostatic load. So trauma happens when there's nobody there with them during the trauma and after to hold space. And then what was the other thing I just said in the second piece of that? The aftercare.
Aftercare, yes,
rest
huge.
and repair. Yeah.
Yes, like the processing of the birth. I love that you said that, because with doula work, it's not like we just, oh, peace out, you had your baby. It's like we do work afterwards to process the birth and to hold space for the fourth trimester and for that resting period. That's so under-respected, especially in North American culture. I don't know if you're following what's going on in the US, but in the US, they just announced that they're actually trying to decrease maternity and family leave care from 12 weeks, which is just ridiculous, to 4, which is like, what the fuck? Blows my mind. But anyways, so like really important work and conversations that we're having, you know, so thank you. And I think, you know what, it's weird being in COVID and navigating the birth space because we can't always be there in person. a lot of hospitals and places that aren't allowing doulas or anyone besides birth partners. So I guess part of that is
Yeah.
also empowering partners to have the tools to make the birthing person feel safe, even if I can't be there in person, even though I want to.
Exactly. Exactly. Wow. What a shift for doulas. Yeah, exactly. And the polyvagal theory is just a beautiful way to, like, if we have theories and ways that we want to show up as coaches in the coaching container, we can always go back to the polyvagal theory and be like, how can I take this coaching cue or this mindset shift or this strategy and relate it back to their physiological reactions so they can say, oh, I'm I'm recognizing that I'm in a mobilized response. And Ariel and I talked about these techniques to get back into my window of tolerance so that I can get into action or I can get into, whatever it is. But yeah, it's obviously not the only way. It's just a really powerful and effective evidence-based way of explaining to people how to move through trauma
I love
and
that.
stay
Thank
resourced.
you.
Yeah,
Thank
you're
you.
welcome.
And do you have
Um,
did you say you have a link for that for more polyvagal or a chat, something? You had something?
yeah, so there, I think Jeej probably put it in there.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, yeah, so so it's actually admin at bewellwithhope.com if you have any questions about anything. But there's also, if you go on my website, bewellwithhope.com, under work with us, there's the breakdown of the different offerings. So one of them is my trauma informed practitioner training. It's 12 weeks and it starts November 17th. And it's $449 US right now. That's the early bird price, and it goes up to $699 after October 31st. And it's going to be modules. All the modules are listed on the website. And we're going to be going in depth into each of the modules. And then once you complete that, if you want to do the clinic mentorship afterward, if you use labs, you use nutrition protocols, you use any type of protocol, like functional protocols, I'll be mentoring people through all of the sticky stuff there for 6 months thereafter. So yeah, I invite you guys to email me or DM me on Instagram. If you want to book a meeting, a collaboration session, talk about the trainings, anything, my door is open. You obviously will get lots of heart emojis and smiley faces and probably voice notes where I'm screeching because I'm so excited. But yeah, reach out. And if today's workshop is the last time that we meet, just know that I'm so grateful you took the time to come and experience my approach to working with clients. And I hope it's been of value. And I really appreciate your energy. So if anybody has any final questions, if anybody has to go, I love you. Bye. But if anybody else has any other questions, I'm here for another 5 or so.